Swanee returned home from the craziest road trip in the history of the world on November 15th, 1899. They were 9-0, undefeated, outscoring opponents by a combined score of 235 to nothing. They had beaten teams that today we consider some of the best: Georgia, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Texas, LSU, and Ole Miss all fell to the might of the men in purple. Finally, for the first time in a week, they rested. 5 days later, the Tigers took on Cumberland College at McGee Field. Now, Cumberland has its own pretty interesting history. In 1903, they would go on their own 5-day road trip, winning 3 games in that span. In 1916, they played Georgia Tech and famously lost by an astounding total of 222 to nothing. Swanee wouldn't beat Cumberland that badly, but maybe the game on November 20th, 1899 should have served as a precursor for future events for Cumberland. The game started off admittedly sloppy, with Swanee fumbling on their opening drive and Cumberland recovering the fumble. The Tigers forced a turnover, though, and put a long pounding drive together that ended with Kilpatrick walking into the end zone. Sims nailed the extra point, and it was 6-0. Swanee had scored the first touchdown after only 7 minutes of play, and it was then that the floodgates opened. Jones returned a punt 20 yards for a touchdown 4.5 minutes later. 3 minutes after that, Warbler Wilson ran 35 yards. Then Diddy Seibels finished the drive with a 5-yard run for another touchdown. Within the next minute, Swanee put together back-to-back 40-yard runs between Seibels and Bowling for another touchdown. 1 minute after that, Seibels ran 80 yards for another touchdown. 2 minutes after, Kilpatrick ran 75 yards to the left for another touchdown. A minute later, Seibels took the ball for 70 yards, touchdown. 3 minutes later, Kilpatrick, 35 yards, touchdown. Finally, after what must have been an eternity for Cumberland, the halftime whistle was blown. The score was 47-0. The Tigers had scored a grand total of 8 touchdowns, with Bart Sims missing only 1 PAT. The second half started with Cumberland in possession, and they really tried to put together a drive, really, but ultimately nothing came of it. They punted, and the onslaught continued. Swanee drove with big runs from Kilpatrick and Jones, then Kilpatrick ran 5 yards for another touchdown. Sims nailed the PAT to make it 53-0 with 8 minutes left. 5 plays later, Kilpatrick ran the ball 50 yards for another touchdown. 2 minutes later, Warbler Wilson walked into the end zone from 10 yards out, another touchdown. 1 minute later, Warbler Wilson ran for 45 yards for another touchdown. And finally, when it looked like Cumberland could handle no more, the refs called time. In all, Swanee won by a score of 71-0. Kilpatrick scored 5 touchdowns, Seibels scored 3, Wilson scored 2, Jones and Bowling each scored 1. Bart Sims had put through a still reigning to this day school record of 11 extra points in that singular game. The Swanee Purple said the game was a foot race where, quote, the varsity scored when they wished to. Swanee was 10-0, still unscored on, and headed to Montgomery for a date with Auburn, with the man who would be Cumberland's doom, 17 years later. John Heisman is the greatest football coach ever. Yes, Nick Saban is amazing. Bear Bryant is a legend. Dabo Swinney is a wonderful coach, but none of them hold a candle to the achievements of one John Heisman. Born October 23, 1869 in Cleveland, Ohio, he was the salutatorian of his high school graduating class. He played lineman at Brown and Penn, and graduated from Penn Law School in 1892. He began his coaching career at Oberlin College in 1892, just after he graduated law school. He developed almost a dictatorial style of coaching at Oberlin College. He described himself as a czar because of his severity and need for efficiency. He once said, "Better to have died as a small boy than to fumble this football." And that was not said in jest. Heisman was most assuredly being the most influential coach in terms of how the game is played since it was invented. He invented the snap, the fake snap. He legalized the forward pass. He invented the hidden ball trick. He came up with ideas of putting downs and yards to go on scoreboards. He signed the first ever Hawaiian player, helped change football from a game of 2 halves to a game of 4 quarters. He coached at Auburn, Clemson, Georgia Tech, Penn, and Rice. He won the SIAA 7 times and the national championship once. He also won an SIAA baseball championship while he was at Georgia Tech in 1906. His career record as a football coach was 186, 70, and 18. He was inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in 1954, 18 years after his death, and, of course, there's really not much that needs to be said about the Heisman Trophy. Well, in 1899, Heisman was still at Auburn. The team was regarded as the best one of his career up to this point, and was undefeated and unscored on heading into their final game of the season. They held wins against Georgia and Clemson, and then they played Georgia twice and they tied Georgia the second game. They had outscored their opponents by a combined 138-0 over 4 games. But for Heisman, there was one last hurdle. The Sewanee Tigers, who were undefeated, unscored on, and seeking their first ever double-digit win season in program history. 3,000 people showed up at Riversdale Park to watch the biggest game of the year for both teams. It was a battle of the Tigers once again. The weather was perfect, and both teams had tons of support in the stands. Sewanee won the toss and chose to receive the opening kick. The game was tighter and more hard-fought than anything either team had seen that season. Sewanee was forced to punt on their opening drive after the usually unstoppable Kilpatrick and Seibels were, well, to be frank, stopped. Sewanee was able to force a fumble, but then were forced to punt on their ensuing drive. Auburn's backs, Bivens, Park, and Skaggs put together some strong running, and finally, Bivens rumbled 5 yards into the end zone. For the first time in the 1899 season, Sewanee trailed 5-0. On Sewanee's next possession, they would strike back. The big three, Seibels, Simpkins, and Kilpatrick, powered their way to the Auburn 10. Then Kilpatrick took an outside run the rest of the way for the touchdown. Sims missed the PAT, so the game was tied. But it was tied, 5-5. Auburn, sensing a swing of momentum, doubled their efforts. Their quarterback, Hewlett, ran left for 20 yards. Then Skaggs, the right halfback, took 2 plays to bring the ball to the Sewanee 10. Fegan, who had a touchdown ruled out on Auburn's last red zone trip, would not be denied this time, and brought the score to 10-5. Auburn led again. Auburn looked to be in control, forcing Sewanee to turn the ball over on downs. They put the Purple Tigers on alert, but Sewanee held firm and didn't concede any points. Towards the end of the half, a controversial call would secure the game's place in the halls of legend. Auburn was driving, but Hughley fumbled. The telling of the events that followed depend on what paper you're reading. Now, according to the Atlanta Constitution, Auburn's right guard Martin fell on the loose ball. But to W.B. Tichenor, who wrote the report, Heisman's, and the rest of the Auburn team in fans' shock, the referee awarded the ball to Sewanee. And on the very next play, Warbler Wilson executed a double pass play, the very play that Heisman invented while at Oberlin, and Wilson scored a touchdown. Sims nailed the extra point, and Sewanee led 11-10. Now, the Sewanee Purple will tell you that while a fumble did occur from Hughley, Sewanee fell on it, just as you usually would. And they wouldn't ever say if it was the caboose, if it was Semp, if it was part Sims, or if it was Rex Kilpatrick. We never knew really who fell on the ball. And that's all that mattered in terms of final score. Because the Sims extra point that took the score to 11-10 would be the last points that either team would score. Sewanee, against the greatest coach ever and one of the best teams in the South, had won in a nail-biter. The controversy surrounding the team's winning touchdown just adds to the legend of the 1899 season. This was a team that refused to lose, even as a titan of the game towered over them. They looked Heisman in the eye, and they beat him with his own play. And this win set them up for a marquee game. North Carolina, Atlanta, for the championship of the South. This was the crowning moment of the Sewanee story.